Good afternoon. I'm State Representative Tom Demmer from Dixon. I'm joined by my colleagues Keith Wheeler and CD Davidsmeyer. And we're here today to talk about the receipt that the state expects to have of federal COVID relief dollars. This was a bill that was signed into law yesterday by President Biden. It's a $1.9 trillion bill, and it includes over $13 billion for state and local governments here in Illinois. Now, some folks have seen that eye-popping number and thought of any number of ways how those dollars could be spent. We're here today to urge a couple of key principles as we review and decide to make appropriations for those dollars that are coming to Illinois. The first thing to keep in mind is that these are COVID relief dollars. These are dollars that are designated by the federal government to provide relief to the governments, businesses, and individuals and families across the country who have been impacted by COVID-19 and the related closures and restrictions of everyday life that we've all been through. It's important for us to understand in Illinois that thankfully the economic impact on the state's finances hasn't been nearly as bad as was first originally feared. We've seen a number of revisions upward of positive changes in the state's collections of income taxes, sales taxes, and others. And it has left the state in a slightly better financial situation than what we thought may have happened when we made the budget last year in the early stages of COVID. So it's very important, I think, as policymakers that we consider who is really in the most need of COVID relief dollars. And in many cases, that's small business owners across the state of Illinois who have seen their businesses closed or restricted or heavily impacted for almost a full year now. Many of those businesses have borne far higher cost and burden from COVID than state government has. And as we receive these dollars, it's very important that we look to the kinds of programs that we can give business grants, give one-time financial aid to these businesses. So as we emerge from COVID, as we reemerge after the pandemic, we have a strong and vibrant economy that can continue to employ people and contribute to their communities all across the state of Illinois. There's also two very important categories we need to look at to improve the state's finances. The first is to pay off the short-term borrowing that currently is funding part of the state budget this year. Over $3 billion has been borrowed from the Federal Reserve and is due to be repaid in the next 2.5 years. That obviously creates an additional amount of financial pressure on top of the struggles and the pressures we already faced to the state's finances. And one of our top priorities with federal relief dollars should be to pay off that debt and to free us from the repayment cycle in the upcoming fiscal years. We also should make another renewed push to pay down our unpaid bill backlog. These are billions of dollars in bills for goods and services that have already been provided to the state by vendors all across the state. In some cases, the same mom and pop folks and small businesses who have been impacted by COVID closures may also be waiting on a past due bill from the state. If we pay down those bills, if we reduce our bill backlog, we do two things. We improve the state's debt situation, our overall financial picture. We also put money in the pockets of these businesses in Illinois who have been waiting for the state to pay them. We think it's very important that we exercise fiscal restraint through this process, that we think about the people who have been so dramatically impacted by COVID, and that we pass along relief dollars to them. And that we don't look to fund new or expanded recurring programs using one-time federal revenue, or we'll find ourselves in a worse situation financially than what we were when we came into this pandemic. So those are key principles that we as House Republicans will continue to push for, to exercise responsibility, to exercise discipline when we're receiving and spending these funds, and to do whatever we can to support the communities all across Illinois who have been profoundly impacted by the pandemic. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Representative Keith Wheeler.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate everything you just said there. Good afternoon. I'm Keith Wheeler, Assistant Republican Leader and State Representative from the 50th District, representing Kane and Kendall counties. Along with what Tom just outlined with respect to how our budget works, we have great concerns about the Illinois economy as House Republicans. And one of the things we're concerned about is how Illinois will emerge economically from the COVID-19 pandemic We need obviously to create jobs and opportunity that will truly lift up families in Chicago, the suburbs, and our amazingly diverse downstate communities. And back in 2019, House Republicans successfully negotiated a series of economic reforms to help spur the creation of good-paying middle-class jobs and new employer investment in our state. And Governor Pritzker signed those bills in, we thought, good faith at the time there. But unfortunately, some of those are being undermined just 2 short years later. The Blue Collar Jobs Act is an innovative tool for Illinois to incentivize construction projects in our state by basing a credit on the construction work actually done by Illinois' incredible labor force. Helping middle-class families is a pretty common talking point for elected officials all across the United States. And there are a lot of proposals to do that, but nothing helps the middle class more than good-paying jobs. That's precisely what the Blue Collar Jobs Act does. It sends a message that Illinois is already open for business by putting our highly skilled construction workers to work. Getting it passed was a win for Illinois, win for Illinois businesses, our construction workers, and all the permanent workers that are impacted after a new facility is opened or a current facility is renovated. This is an important piece because it was supported by both labor and business groups. And the tax credits only become available after the work has been fully completed. So there's no risk to the state. There's no dollars going out of the state that haven't already come in the first place. Unfortunately, just days after the Blue Collar Jobs Act went into effect back in January, the governor announced via a press release that he was placing a freeze on it, an indefinite freeze. And that's kind of, we think going back on an agreement we had in 2019 with him about these economic reforms that are so important to all these families that would be impacted by those jobs. So earlier today, I, along with Assistant Majority Leader Jay Hoffman, sent a letter to Governor Pritzker requesting that the Blue Collar Jobs Act be reinstated and the DCO resume accepting applications for the tax credit. We call on the governor to reconsider this decision because this is money that was already, in some people's minds, this is a tax credit that's going to cost the state money. It's not. But even if you take that into account, this is money we accounted for back in 2019 and put together at that time. It's already been allocated. We don't want to miss the summer construction season for the many families who directly benefit from this package. So time is of the essence. We all know we can accomplish a lot when we work together in good faith, as we did 2 years ago. And we're here today again to make it clear this is the path that not only House Republicans, but House Democrats are prepared to take again. We can work together and get Illinois ready for a robust economic comeback. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Leader C.D. Davidsmeyer.
Thank you, Keith and Tom. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. What I really want to focus on is transparency and opportunity for us all to work together. Back in May of 2020, the Democrats passed a horribly unbalanced bill based on the hope that Governor Pritzker's progressive tax would pass. We all know the reality that the state of Illinois, over half of Illinoisans turned that down. If you look at recent history, back in 2019, Republicans came together with then new Governor J.B. Pritzker to try to come up with a bipartisan balanced budget. And we worked together and we came up with some good agreements. I think it's past time for us to come together and start to work on these as soon as possible. I think that some of my Democrat colleagues have even said that we need to come together to discuss how the federal dollars are going to be spent. We need to look at the governor's proposed budget, and we need to be sitting down with him. He gave his proposal almost a month ago and still has yet to have a sit-down meeting with any House Republicans. While the COGFA, Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability, has said that the revenues coming into the state, the natural growth in the state of Illinois is better than expected, which is great news for Illinoisans. We still have to make some difficult decisions, and I think the people of the state of Illinois sent Republicans and Democrats to Springfield to work together to make those difficult decisions. The governor's been on his tour signing bills that are going to cost the state an additional, $5 to $10 billion. I was just in a committee right before this press conference that's looking at spending an additional $5 to $12 billion on top of that. I think we need to get together, get back to reality, sit down, be transparent in this process, and work together to pass a truly balanced budget that doesn't use the federal dollars to fill holes, but to get us out of the holes.
So the first question we got here is from Greg Bishop. Representative Halbrick has agency directors about the 5% cuts the governor previously requested. What's your confidence level those efficiencies will be found?
For the past several months, the House Republicans have been seeking to get from the Pritzker administration the list of those cuts that supposedly have been put together. Both in September of 2019, when the administration asked department heads to identify 6.5% cuts, as well as in the fall of 2020, when they asked for 5% cuts, we assume that agency directors and department heads listened to the governor's request and put together the kind of options that might be available within their agencies. We think that's crucial information for appropriations committees in the House and the Senate to have as we debate and try to craft a budget for the upcoming fiscal year, a budget that's not going to be easy. And we should have the kind of every idea on the table. We should be able to review these different proposals and find where agency heads would point to say, I think in this part of my agency, we'd be able to reduce costs. That's part of just frankly responsible budget making. And the fact that the Pritzker administration has refused to share any of these plans, even going so far as to deny a freedom of information request by the media, is really peculiar, and I think leaves more questions than answers about how we're supposed to work together in a collaborative way in making a balanced budget for the upcoming year when it's clear that one side is not being forthcoming with the information that's needed.
Okay, and then we have a follow-up to that question. Illinois is the highest taxed state in the nation, according to Wallet Hub, and the state's finances are still a mess. Why?
In my 6 years in the General Assembly, we haven't taken seriously one of the first steps in the budget making process, which is to adopt a revenue estimate, which is meant to serve as a spending cap on Springfield. When we pass bills and they allocate money here and there, we don't necessarily count that against the grand total. And we aren't really keeping track of what we're spending or what we're allocating the way we could and the way we should. It should be collaborative. A spending cap's benefit for everyone. We want to make sure that what we promise people actually gets to them, but make sure the money we're going to receive is actually going to go where it's supposed to go. We're not overpromising something that's not going to get to where someone's counting on that money for an important program. So to me, we need to pick our budget process at a higher level for all of us. And that starts with a revenue estimate, which serves as a spending cap on Springfield.
And really quick, not only that, but I think the politicians in Springfield really need to get back to reality and understand that we can't continue to promise things when we're not fulfilling the promises that were made years and years ago. So we have to work on fulfilling the promises that were already made before we can make any more, if we can ever make any more.
Okay, our next question is from the SJR. Why are some people calling the federal relief a bailout?
Federal relief dollars that are coming to the state, we have an opportunity whether to use those to provide relief from COVID or whether we do treat it like it's a magical bailout. If we make no underlying changes to the state's budget, if we simply take this money that came from the federal government and throw it into the black hole of state day-to-day operational expenses, I think that would be treating it like a bailout, and it would be depriving the people of Illinois from the intended purpose of the funds, which is to provide relief from the financial and economic impacts that COVID has had. The state government has not seen as large a fiscal impact as a small business who's had to have been closed for many of the last 12 months has seen. They haven't seen as big an impact as somebody who lost their job or who saw a significant reduction in their employed hours. We haven't felt as big an impact as those folks have. And so if the state decides to keep all this money and simply shovel it into the endless appetite for operating expenses in Springfield, that would be treating it like a bailout. The alternative, though, is for us to be targeted, us to provide relief, and us to use this as a way to provide the kind of COVID relief that they intended to provide in Washington. It's really our choice whether this is COVID relief or whether this is a bailout of a system that was flawed long before anybody ever heard the word COVID.
The data center tax credit you created has been used by the governor. What do you believe his aversion is to the Blue Collar Jobs Act?
The business community was successful in thwarting the governor's efforts for a progressive income tax, and this could be some kind of a payback. I hope that that's not the case. Another version would be that in this case, the Blue Collar Jobs Act would actually cost the state money because we allocated a $20 million tax credit. But for that tax credit to actually happen, the state has had to take in $40 million in the first place. So realistically, the state comes out ahead regardless. So this is a win-win that we should take advantage of, just like we've done with the data center tax credit, which is providing massive growth at the data center that I've driven by in DeKalb. I know that the governor's team is trying to use that as an incentive and a lure for the New York Stock Exchange to come to Illinois, which I'm in favor of. We want to see those opportunities come to our state and create those jobs, the permanent jobs as well as the construction jobs that they would benefit from these kinds of incentives that we agreed to as a team back in 2019. So I look forward to that resuming operations and benefiting the construction workers of the state of Illinois.
Our next question from WSPY News. Are you in favor of putting restrictions on the federal aid money to ensure that it mainly provides relief to smaller businesses?
One of the key functions of the legislative branch is to have the power of appropriations. It's the power of the purse. It's one of the fundamental things the legislature does. We decide how money can be spent. Last spring, when we expected to receive money from the federal government, the legislature essentially gave the governor a blank check to receive that money from the federal government and to create any programs he saw fit to hand that money out. I think now that we've got a year of the pandemic under our belt, we're not making predictions about what was going to happen. We've actually seen the evidence of what's happened. The legislature needs to use our power of the appropriation process to control money and to make sure that a significant portion goes to provide COVID relief to the businesses, to the communities, to the families who have been so dramatically impacted by this. So instead of just kind of having general restrictions or a general direction for these dollars, we should aggressively use our appropriation power to ensure that specific dollar amounts are allocated to the people who really need them.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.